So after every trip, it's kind of nice to sit down and look back at how things went and kind of assess and learn some lessons before you go on your next trip.
We're home, but we can't relax just quite yet. We've got some boxes out. We have to empty out the entire trailer because it's going in for service. So yeah, let's pack her up.
So let's start with some of the items that we brought with us that we found really, really useful, that we used all the time. And that would be our clothes drying racks. We actually brought 2 and they were very helpful because we hang dry a lot of our clothes. Something else that we brought that was really useful was 2 different kettles. We have an electric kettle and a regular standard whistling kettle. And that's so that when we're boondocking, we can use the propane kettle, and when we're plugged in and have hookups, we can use the electric kettle, saving our propane. A couple other things that we brought that we found really useful were my lap desk, so that I could sit in bed and we can have the computer on there. We also found it really useful to have our toolbox with extra fuses and extra supplies and extra parts. That way, when we did come across an issue, which there were several, we usually had the part that we needed to be able to fix it. And then finally, the other thing we found really useful was having a 5-gallon water jug with us, or a water bladder, whatever you want. That way, when you're boondocking, you can have some extra water on hand, whether for drinking, or we were actually using it to fill our RV water tank. So those were kind of the things that we found really, really useful.
It's your piñata. So what are things that we brought but didn't use? Well, Mel brought a whole bunch of baking supplies and her recipe box, thinking, oh, she'd have so much time to bake. Didn't have quite that much time. I, on the other hand, brought an entire suitcase of music stuff. My keyboard, all of my computer audio hookups. You know how many times I used that? Once, to do some music editing. So I was a little overambitious with my hobby plans too. Back here we also brought our snorkel gear, which unfortunately I didn't get to use. I was really disappointed about that. And as well, we brought our dump tote. Didn't use that once, but we were glad to have it with us. And our generator, didn't use once except to test it, but also glad to have it with us as a backup. Brought my good monitor speakers, used 0 times.
I brought an ironing board and an iron, used once. Rain pants. It rained about twice. I can't actually believe that we brought these. These are micro spikes. So a couple things that we wish that we had actually brought with us that we didn't. An ice cream scoop, that would have been smart, and a second water jug. We did buy a second one while we were away, and then that just increased our capacity for being able to fill up the water tank when we were boondocking. So on this trip, of course, we started at the Canadian border, and we beelined down to San Francisco in about 2 days. From there, we went to the California coast and hung out around Pismo Beach. Then we went east into the California desert and did La Quinta. We went to Joshua Tree National Park. Then we crossed over into Arizona, went to Quartzsite. And then we hung out around the Yuma area. And then back up to the Quartzsite area. And then we went to Phoenix and stayed there for about 10 days. Then we came back to the California coast. We beelined that in about 2 days. Hung around Lompoc, then Santa Barbara, then back to Pismo Beach, and we did Big Sur from there, and then a little bit inland east to Paso Robles when the truck broke down, and then we started heading north from there to start the journey home. And so we got on the I-5 and went through Northern California, Oregon, and Washington State, back to the Canadian border, and now we're home. So all in all, that was 96 days of journey and a lot of miles. So I'm going to hand you over to Jay and he'll tell you all about those details.
This worked out to a total of 3,884 miles, or 6,170 kilometers, 86 hours of traveling to different destinations. So 26 of our 96 total days were spent traveling. That's about a quarter of the total days. Something that we found that was really interesting that we didn't expect was we did a lot of local travel. So there was actually 2,560 miles of local travel. That's 4,120 kilometers, 67 hours spent in the truck after we were already at our destination. So that really surprised us. That is a grand total then of 6,444 miles, or 10,290 kilometers, 153 hours of time spent on the road. Mm-hmm. That's a little bit shocking.
Yep, we weren't expecting that at all.
So I think one thing that we're thinking for future trips is maybe not quite as much local travel.
And so what we mean by that is on this trip, we would drive a good distance and then plant ourselves for about a week and then journey out from there, almost up to about an hour in any direction, multiple directions usually, because there's things all around to see. So what we're thinking maybe for next time is to travel shorter distances for maybe shorter periods of time and limit the distance we're willing to travel for a day trip, and then just kind of continue on the path that way.
Yeah, and maybe we might just have to not do and see everything. We packed in a lot on this trip, and it was maybe even a little bit too much at times. Another thing we noticed is that we were shopping a lot. So we would go and get groceries every 2 days, which really isn't all that necessary. I think, if we plan and kind of meal plan like we do here at home, then we might be able to limit our grocery trips to once a week. Which
like we do at home. I don't know why we didn't think of doing it like that on the road, but it was all very experimental this year, so we learned a few things. Now let's talk about the favorite things that we found, saw, and ate while we were there. So starting with California, we're going to break this down by state. So my favorite things in California were Lotus Land in Santa Barbara, Ostrich Land in Solvang,
and I really loved the Joshua Tree National Park. I also really, really enjoyed the rocket launch. That was huge for me, something I've wanted to see all my life and finally got to do. And
then as far as campgrounds go around California, I mean, we haven't been to all of them. There's so many. But I think one of our top favorite ones were Cahuilla Lake, which was out in La Quinta, and Cachuma Lake, which was not far from Santa Barbara. And then I think we can both agree that our favorite day trip that we did in California, though, was the Big Sur coast.
Yeah, Big Sur was astounding.
So now let's talk a little bit about Arizona. Favorite things for me, well, I'm a foodie. I loved the chocolate-covered dates at Imperial Date Farms, just outside of Yuma. It was absolutely incredible. And the Mexican food restaurants that we went to in Yuma were just top-notch.
And I really enjoyed the hikes. The Saddle Mountain hike, for instance, that was just really, really cool. And the Palm Canyon hike in Cofa, I just loved that too.
South Mountain was also a very beautiful hike. And then as far as our camping went, in Arizona, we pretty much did all boondocking. So I think our favorite BLM camping places were Cofa and Saddle Mountain. They were the most picturesque we found. And then for us, this was the first time we've ever really been to the desert too. So just seeing the different plants was really interesting. Saguaro cacti and the ocotillos were just so cool. And interestingly, there were so many hummingbirds in the desert. We had no idea.
Yeah, I love the cactuses, which I learned is an acceptable way to say it, as well as cacti.
Oh, gosh.
You can say cactuses or cacti.
Where'd you find that out?
Google.
I don't know.
Everyone, pause the video and look that up right now.
And then tell us in the comments, cactuses or cacti. All right, so today we are taking our trailer for service. You may remember last summer we hit a tree and popped a hole in through the rubber roof. We've patched that, but we didn't patch it in time and there's a soft spot. So we've got to get the trailer to the repair shop.
We're hooking up in the hail. Maybe now is a good time for me to tell you about everything that broke on this trip. Our taillight was broken as we were trying to leave. Then our shower head broke the first time we tried to use it. The baseboard beside our door broke. And then of course the first bit of cold weather we had in Quartzsite, our furnace broke, which I was thankfully able to fix. Our door hinge broke out in the desert. Then we had a flat tire on our trailer. One of the fuses on my solar just melted and self-destructed. And then of course, the huge one, our truck broke badly. Towards the end, our converter started acting up. Finally, a trailer light fuse went, and it actually went twice. So we're gonna have to look into why that's happening too. That's a lot of broken stuff in 97 days. RV life for you. So we just arrived and we're gonna unhitch it right here. It's gonna be sad to not have our trailer for a while. One of the things we learned on this trip was how to have a more flexible itinerary. On previous trips, we had mapped out all of our stops and all of our traveling in great detail, but this time, we basically just planned a week in advance. This allowed us to be really flexible. For instance, we left Quartzsite a little bit earlier than we had planned, so we could meet up with some friends in the desert. Our biggest change in plans was to drive all the way back to the California coast to catch a rocket launch. Of course, all of those instances are us choosing to learn how to be flexible. But life can throw some curveballs, and there were moments where we had to learn to be flexible when forced. For instance, when the windstorm was coming in Arizona, we had to quickly find a new location to camp that was more sheltered. We also had to learn to be more flexible with our plans when our truck broke down, and when our COVID test to enter Canada again got cancelled at the last minute. The driveway looks so empty without the trailer. It's so strange. People are going to think we're not home.
Ready to break it down? Mm-hmm. Break it down now!
We're breaking down the expenses. What? So, I've got my spreadsheet printout here. First of all, we're going to tell you the grand total. And I'm going to say all the amounts in US dollars first, since this was a US trip. So, for our trip, the grand total was $13,100 US, or $17,030 Canadian. That might sound a little bit insane, and actually it sounded insane to me after I added it all up.
Yes.
But let's see what that actually entails. So, as you might know, we had a huge breakdown with our truck, and that actually cost just over $3,400 US to fix. So, to give you a better idea of what a trip like this actually costs, we're going to remove that very large expense, and that brings our vehicle maintenance down to then just $154 US, which is a lot more reasonable. And that brings our total then to $9,840 US dollars, which is about 12,792 Canadian.
Which also seems a little bit ridiculous.
It sounds like a lot of money too.
Yeah.
So we're also then going to exclude normal costs that we would have had at home even if we weren't traveling. So the new total after we exclude those costs is $6,558 US, or $8,525 Canadian. Let's get into some of the individual costs though. Our biggest cost by far was gas. That was over $2,500 US. And honestly, I think the way that we could decrease that in the future is something that we talked about before, not as much local travel. Mm-hmm. Because it would have been maybe 2/3 or half that cost if we had kind of cut down. Another cost that was a lot more than we thought it would be was our campgrounds. We thought we would be like camping for free everywhere. Mm-hmm. But as it turns out, there's just not a whole lot of free camping or boondocking on the California coast, or really like in Western California at all. Not only is it not free, it's very expensive. So we spent $1,387 on campgrounds, which was a fair bit more than we thought we would.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I think that would be easily mitigated in the future if we really pick where we're going to stay and, quite frankly, avoid the California coast, which we love the California coast, but it's expensive. Another big cost, being Canadian, is healthcare. So our health insurance for the trip was $1,100 US approximately. And that covers us for any number of 90-day trips during the year. Mm-hmm. So that cost increases as you get older and if you have health problems as well. So for us, it actually wasn't that bad. Mm-hmm. That's a cost that could be a lot more for some people. Mm-hmm. So other big expenses for the trip, dining was about $780 US, but we cut that in half to $392 because we would typically have dining expenses even if we were at home.
Mm-hmm. And by dining, we mean eating out at restaurants, not just groceries.
So groceries, we spent about $1,800 US, but we didn't include that in our trip costs because it was not too different from what we would spend on groceries at home. For entertainment, we spent about $520 US, but again, we cut that in half because we would have entertainment expenses at home too. Miscellaneous was $544. Again, cut that in half. So for those things, we figure we probably would have spent about half that amount if we were just staying at home. Other costs, trailer maintenance, we spent about $230 US. Laundry was around about $120 US. That was a bit harder to track because we spent that mostly in cash. So that's another tip for tracking expenses. Put as much as you can on like one credit card, and then it's really easy to go through and add it up in the end. Propane, we only spent about $80 US. I think that was pretty good. We were rationing propane fairly well.
It's because I wasn't baking like I had originally thought I would be.
Yes, I think if you'd been baking, that would be a lot higher. Mm-hmm. So maybe we'll budget for that next time. And then dump and water fees, around about $50 US, which pretty reasonable. We tried to dump if we were staying at a pay campground, or we tried to find the most inexpensive one in that area. And that's it. We'd love to hear what you think of these costs and how it compares to costs that you've had on your trips.
You're just going to have to include it because I've poured my tea and I can't do those actions again.
Or 6170 kilometers. No, I don't want to say it that way. Try again.
Ostrich land in, where was that again?
And the Palm, what is it? Palm
Canyon?
Palm Canyon. And the Palm Canyon?
Those saguaros?
Make sure you don't miss the next video by liking, subscribing, and turning on notifications. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you in the next one.